Christine Schneider, the Visceral Voice.
Welcome to the Visceral Voice podcast. I'm your host, Christine Schneider. Through this podcast, I aim to bring you the most current, up-to-date research on voice science, function, pain science, movement, and everything in between. I am on a quest to learn everything I can about the living, breathing body and its intricate connection to the voice. This podcast documents the continuation of my learning and my experience as a professional singer, a nutritional consultant, a movement specialist, and a manual therapist. Join us as we strive to provide current, knowledgeable, creative, and compassionate information to help you restore, regain, and create happiness and success on your vocal journey. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. On today's episode, I have a conversation with Alexandra Beller. Alexandra has been a professional dancer with the Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Dance Company. She runs her arts company, Alexandra Beller Dances, since 2001, producing dozens of original dance theater works which have been performed internationally. She has been a teacher of dance, theater, pedagogy, and somatics for over 20 years. She currently teaches Laban and Bartenieff Fundamentals at the Laban Institute for Movement Studies, contemporary dance and choreography at Princeton, and choreographs and directs theater off-Broadway and regionally. I had such a wonderful conversation with Alexandra. I learned so much. I had literally only learned a few little trickles of Laban, it feels like, compared to her vast knowledge of these methods. And I actually had never even heard of Bartenieff and her amazing work. So I really enjoyed my conversation. I know that you will too. Here you are, my conversation with Alexandra Beller. If you don't mind, first, just telling us a little about you and how you came into dance and into all of your movement methods, and just how you came to the work that you're doing today.
Well, I feel like I've had about 8 different lives in movement and performance. I started dancing around age 10, which at the time felt late because I started and I immediately knew that I was a dancer. People would say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I'm already doing it." I went from kind of genre to genre. I went to the Joffrey, I went to the Graham School. I didn't really find people that were accepting me as I was, and I ended up in jazz and became like a hardcore jazz dancer. I wanted to dance for Janet Jackson, Madonna. That'll tell you how old I am. And I didn't feel ready after high school, so I went to college. I went to the University of Michigan, which was really a modern department, pretty classical training. Then my authenticity and my weirdness came out. And by the time I got back to New York, I wasn't really a jazz dancer anymore. Got into Bill T. Jones pretty quickly after college, danced with him for 7 years, and then left because I really felt compelled to make my own work. And then I started a dance theater company. I was always speaking and moving in my work. It was never straight dance. And teaching technique, mostly a little bit of choreography, choreographing. I that company still exists, though it's really morphed into an education company. Toured and created work, and was teaching a lot, and felt that I needed more underpinning for my teaching. I felt like, as many people do, I'd become a teacher out of being a performer. And they're very different skill sets, but the people who hire you often don't recognize that. If you have some reputation as a performer, you'll you'll get jobs teaching pretty easily, which I think in a lot of ways I should not have. But I'm thankful that I did because I really learned on my feet. And then I felt that I needed more scaffolding. So I went to grad school. And when I came out, I felt like that wasn't quite it. Something else. I want a system. And I kept teaching. I was also a massage therapist. I taught gyrotonic, and I was kind of seeking. I was still choreographing, still dancing. And then I found Laban and Bartenieff, and I went to school at the Laban Bartenieff Institute for Movement Studies, got my CMA, which stands for Certified Movement Analyst. And that really was what I needed. And I feel like then I really located what I wanted to do. I don't feel like I wasted any time before that, but I felt like that gave me exactly what I needed, a kind of organizational framework for everything and for my ideas, physical, spiritual, emotional, textual, etc. And then I really transitioned into choreographing for theater. So now I choreograph for plays, off-Broadway, regional plays, hopefully eventually Broadway, and mentor and teach mostly choreography. And I'm writing a book and have gotten very deep into somatic thinking and practices and the integration of all the systems, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, physical, environmental systems, that it's all an ecosystem that I'm starting to work inside, both in my performative work, creative work, writing, teaching, mentoring, moving, speaking, etc. So I feel like I've gotten to this very sweet spot, and I feel really excited about what's to come based on all of this information that I've been accumulating over time.
With Laban, and I think if people had some kind of similar in education as me, where it was like a dribble of this kind of method,
Yeah, dabble.
dabble. I know that there are 4 components to Laban. So the body, effort, shape, and
Space.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are like subcategories off of that. There are 4 components of efforts and then 8 efforts off of those components and shape and all of that. So if you don't mind just kind of running us down some of the theory behind the movement.
So yes, you remember it all perfectly from school. Body, effort, shape, and space are 4, I call them pillars. They all interconnect. They're all Venn diagrams with each other, like the Olympic circle sign. But inside them, you can break it down. One of the things I really love about both Laban and Bartenieff is that you can break things down to really very small, independent parts so that you can see the relationship between things. I liken it sometimes on my first day of teaching a Laban Bartenieff course. I'll often say, you know how you pick a Post-it note up and sometimes 2 or 3 come with you, and sometimes you don't even notice you've got 2 or 3 until you go to put it somewhere, and then you're like, oh, I have extra paper here. I think we do that all the time with our choices. We make a choice, but 1 or 2 other choices kind of glom onto it. So I try to move with this lightness, but I find that I'm moving with this kind of slowness as well. And that doesn't need to happen. It can, if that's my choice. But habit, which is not a dirty word, habit's great and necessary. It's also really necessary to be mindful of habit. Yes, this is the way I do it. I do it this way out of familiarity, and I'm making that choice towards familiarity right now. Or if I want to do it differently, I absolutely can. So I can only get off my bike on one leg. I try to get off my bike on the other leg, I will fall over in the street. That's because of habit. And the depth of that habit, intensity of that habit has robbed me of a choice. I can no longer get off my bike on the opposite leg. Maybe I would like to. Maybe it would be better for some of my pelvic stability and symmetry for me to be able to get off alternating sides. But I've I've deepened into habit so much that that other side is no longer available to me. So one of the things that I really love about both Laban and Bartenieff is it breaks everything down so that you can see it, so that then you can make the choice that you want to make. This goes with this. No, this and this for this particular moment. So we've got, yes, body, effort, shape, space. The body category really includes Bartenieff Fundamentals. So inside body, we've got actions. Think of them like verbs, jump and turn, rotate, locomote, etc. Kind of action words. And we've got Bartenieff Fundamentals, which is anatomy, kinesiology, biomechanics. It's also principles like weight shift and core support and breath support. And then body parts, what body part is doing what. So we often think of body as the category of what. What is doing what? Space, of course, is the category of where. Space is very profound. Space is our relationship to our inner space and to our environment. And so that's our connection to the world. So space is not just, a simple geometry. It's a very deep harmonic experience of our body inside our environment. So space includes dimensions, planes, diagonals, platonic solids, how we interact inside the platonic solids, um, spatial keys, which means who am I prioritizing, the outer space or the inner space, meaning I could say front is wherever I'm facing, or I could say front is me facing you. And when I turn my back to you, I'm facing back. Right? Or I could say, no, my front is wherever I'm looking. That's a really big, meaningful difference in how we're relating to our environment. It's deep. And we have scales in space, just like we have music scales. We have movement scales, which allow you to practice moving to different points in space, which allows us, again, more choice making. How often do we go to back, low, across? Not super often. Even when we're taking lots of improv classes, taking Gaga, whatever it may be, we have our habits, we have our safe spaces, we have our familiar spaces. Those are great. Nothing wrong with those. Do we have the option at all times to go anywhere we want to go? Maybe not. So practicing the scales, just like practicing music scales, allows you to make the choice to go anywhere you want with dexterity and availability. And that translates into spiritual choices, emotional choices, relational choices. Because when we practice being able to go more places in space, we're practicing being able to go more places in our life. Body space shape is a category that's a younger category. It was really only initiated by Laban and has been taken over by his disciples, proteges. Warren Lamb is one of them, and he developed the whole field of nonverbal communication, which is stuff that is used by the CIA and corporations. It's body language, right? And we have heard so much now about how we really read each other and we read meaning through body. We don't read meaning as much through the words, yes, through facial expressions, but mostly through body language. And it's a very high percentage of information that we get from body language. Most of the category of shape has been developed since Laban introduced it. It has also become a lot of what we know as dance movement therapy and child psychology. So Judith Kestenberg also took that work and brought it into child psychology. And then effort, which is a beautiful category. So I said body was the what, space is the where, shape we talk about being the why. Why do you move? You move for yourself, you move to get to something, or you move to connect, adapt, and interact with something. And there are really three reasons why we move and change shape. So the title shape can sound like it's about, a circle and a square and a line, but really it's much, much deeper than that. It's about why we move.
Mm.
And then effort, which we talk about being the how of our movement. So inside effort, we have, as you mentioned, these four, we call them motion factors: weight, time, space, and flow. And then inside those motion factors, it's a continuum. And the continuum goes from, so say weight goes from lightweight to strong weight, free flow to bound flow, quick time, sustained time, direct to indirect. And it's a continuum that we're on. And when you start to make choices inside effort of, say, 2 efforts or 3 qualities, we call them light, direct, and free, or quick, strong, and bound. That's a hard one. We start getting into all of the different ways that we can both express and also function. So every single thing we do, from lifting up a salt shaker to moving a piano, requires dynamic. We think of effort also as dynamic. If you use the same dynamic effort to lift a salt shaker as you use to move a piano, you would throw that salt shaker across the room and it would smash against the wall. And of course, if you tried to use the salt shaker effort on a piano, it wouldn't go anywhere, right? So we're always in effort, and we all know about this. It's just we don't know how to name it. So
Mm.
what I think that Laban does so brilliantly is it just teaches you how to observe and name what you've been doing your whole life and will continue to do your whole life. And then, of course, these can be used for expression as well. So this has been the cornerstone of what I use in working with actors in theater. It's all about the how. And what I really love about effort for theater is that it can create a much safer environment, because instead of saying words which, we often call agendas in theater, be more aggressive, be more seductive, those can be very triggering words for people. People have their own history, their own trauma, their own
Mm.
associations with each of those words. Society has freighted those words with all kinds of stereotypes and ways in which we demean and diminish people. We use racial stereotypes, we use gender stereotypes, and those are embedded in our language. So
Mm.
when we allow ourselves to take that language off the table, and instead of aggressive, we just say, I want you to be more direct and stronger, and we just work on those qualities, then any associations that person has with aggressive can go away. And
Mm.
the fear that oh, my father was so aggressive and caused trauma in my life, I don't want to be aggressive. We don't need to deal with that in the rehearsal room. That's not in the play. I don't need to bring that up in your body.
Mm.
Be strong and be direct. And you might find that something you've been avoiding in your life because of that trauma, you're able to engage with suddenly through an artistic experience, and that can be very healing. So rather than re-traumatizing somebody, you actually can heal them just through negotiating new language choices.
Mm.
So that was a lot, but that's a very brief overview of the system of Laban movement analysis: body, effort, shape, space, and lots of subcategories, as you mentioned, inside that.
Yeah. And then the 8 efforts.
Yeah, the 8 qualities. So we've got weight, flow, space, and time are the motion factors. That's 4. Each of them is on a continuum. So weight, light, and strong. Flow is free and bound. Time is quick and sustained. And space is direct and indirect. So now you've got 8. You can never use the 2 ends of a continuum at the same time. So
Mhm.
you're always you only really have 4 out of 8 at a given time. And as humans, we don't use 4. In a life or death moment, you might use 4. We are generally in what we call a state, which is 2 qualities.
Mm.
And so then it breaks down into this whole system. If you've got 2 out of 4, you've always got an opposite 2. So if you're working with 2 motion factors like weight and space, you've got 4 qualities. You've got strong and light and direct and indirect, and that's all you're working with in that state. But inside that, you've got 4 choices. You've got light and indirect, light and direct, strong and indirect, strong and direct. So now you've got these 4 different ways that you can interact inside weight and space. And we have 6 of those states. So suddenly the whole thing starts to open out. And what often gets taught in higher education are just these 8 combinations, which is an action drive, which is weight, space, and time. And inside a drive, you've got 8 combinations. And so we've got float, punch, glide, slash, dab, ring, flick, press. And that's often what gets handed down.
That's what I remember. Those.
Yeah. It's a pretty big pet peeve of mine that that's all they teach, because actually, first of all, they're leaving out flow entirely. And flow is our ongoingness. It's our life force. It's our energy. How can you leave that out? Second of all, we're mostly not in a drive. That's a drive. It's pretty complicated to do 3 things at one time. We're mostly in a state. So really, you're not practicing your humanity when you're practicing action. There's nothing wrong with action drive. It's wonderful. But it's 8 potential combinations. And in total, in effort, there are 80. So
Wow.
there are 80 ways that you can practice functioning and expressing. And in higher education, they're usually practicing 8. Now, I'm glad that they're getting something, but it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yes, because when I was talking about 8, I thought we were talking about the ring, press, dab, punch, but then you actually mentioned the direct, indirect, the heavy, light, sustained, quick, bound, free. So I was like, oh my gosh, wait, that's incredible. And being in a state, you have 2, because that's usually what we actually kind of focus, or how we as human beings actually are in our everyday life. So why would we might play with including more, but it is a choice to do that. This is awesome. I didn't even know all of that about Laban. So then on top of all of this, there's Bartenieff.
Bartenieff.
Yes.
Yes. So Irmgard Bartenieff is one of the most amazing humans, and very under-celebrated, which is, not shocking. She was incredibly meaningful, and she was a physical therapist. She studied with Laban in Germany and in the UK, and then brought his work to America. He never stepped foot on this continent. Everything we got from Laban that is outside of his writings is through her. But she was also a physical therapist, and she worked a lot with kids who were recovering from polio. And I think was seeing that the traditional methods of physical therapy were not working, that you had to go back and work on the development and the developmental movement. And so she really developed a system in which she started breaking down both the developmental movement patterns and also the basic physiological biomechanics of the body: flexion, extension, rotation, abduction, circumduction, and practicing them, similar to what I was saying about Laban, independently. So that, as you're doing rotation, are you also doing, more flexion than you need? As you're doing ab and adduction, are you doing more rotation of that lower spine than you need? Probably. Is that stressing your body out, creating a certain kind of habit and trauma? Possibly. So what if we just separate them? When I first started studying Bartenieff, I was coming off of a career as a professional dancer, longtime choreography career. I started taking Bartenieff class, and I was like, this is ridiculous. I know how to lift my leg. You don't need to teach me how to lift oh my goodness, I do not know how to lift my leg. And I couldn't believe it. When I really slowed down and really, really started looking at how I was doing what I was doing, I felt I had never learned to lift my leg correctly, and we learn so much through modeling and mirroring after teachers who are demonstrating, rather than learning through task-based experiential learning. And we rarely teach children through this kind of experiential learning. And so I hadn't learned how to lift my leg. I'd learned how to do what they were doing. It didn't matter what it felt like or how I was accomplishing it. It looked like that, so it was good.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started breaking it down, I realized, no, I actually, I don't know how to do most of the things that I do. I'm kind of in a way faking them. And so the Bartenieff system, I think of as having kind of 4 pillars as well. The developmental movement patterns or the body organizations, those are something that got taken and seeded and blossomed by Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, who's the mother of body mind centering or BMC. So in Bartenieff, we talk about the organization of breath, core distal, head, tail, upper, lower, body half, and diagonal. In BMC, that becomes cellular respiration, navel radiation. So cellular respiration, navel radiation, spinal, homologous, homolateral, and cross-lateral. Those are the BMC, and they're different. They're expanded. So we have body organizations. We've got what we call the basic 6. The basic 6 are actual exercises that you can do. So thigh lift, forward pelvic shift, lateral pelvic shift, knee drop, arm circle, and body half. And we use them to practice the basic biomechanics of the body. Then we've got 9 principles, which you can apply to anything. And honestly, I apply them to politics, relationships, communication, all kinds of things. Breath support, core support, weight shift, dynamic alignment, effort intent, spatial intent, initiation and sequencing, rotary factor, developmental movement patterns. So you can look at any of these as a window into observing, experiencing, creating movement. But I also like to think about what is the breath support in a family? What is the weight shift in a country? So we're experiencing a global crisis right now in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
There's a huge weight shift happening in that country. How do you look at weight shift towards health in politics, in economics, in your spiritual practice? And I truly believe, and I'm not alone in believing this, that you can devise ways to practice physically what you want to create, what you want to manifest spiritually, emotionally, socially, politically, environmentally. So I was teaching Bartenieff a lot around the time that George Floyd was murdered last summer. And a lot of my students and myself were out protesting, feeling exhausted, needing some kind of resilience and recuperation. And so we talked a lot about stability and mobility. And we talked about how we were in a hypermobile moment where we were trying hard to mobilize something that had been hyper stabilized, namely systemic racism had been hyper stabilized for hundreds of years. Too stable, not moving. We were trying to suddenly mobilize it in a big way. Not that, not there, not that way. And it was exhausting. So in my class, I practiced a lot about where are you grounding? Where's your stability? Practice your foot to fly the other leg. Practice your pelvis to flow the legs. So let's really notice where we can stabilize, because without stability, there is no mobility. So as we were working on this practice of trying to extremely mobilize, what we needed was stability in our body. Otherwise, we were flying all over the place and getting lost. So in class, we practice that stability towards social justice. Now you can say, well, you're lying on the floor lifting your leg. How are you affecting social justice? But I truly believe that when you're practicing it at the body, you're practicing it in the world. And when you're caretaking and recuperating in the specific way that you need to recuperate to be able to do the exertion required of you in the world, then you're finding balance. And when we're balanced, we're stronger. And when we're stronger, we're more
Hey everyone, I just
we're
wanted
more
to take
active,
a
we're
few
more
moments to tell you
productive,
about some things going
and
on
we
here
can
at the Visceral
affect bigger
Voice.
change
The
in the
first
world.
is that Michael and I are collaborating on a class November 10th, Wednesday, November 10th, at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time, called Upright Core Training for the Singer. So if you want to learn how to train your core in an upright position, please join Michael and I on November 10th at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. And please click the link in the show notes or visit us at www.thevisceralvoice.com. Also, we do have musical anatomy apparel where we combined a musical with anatomy and put it on shirts. My amazing illustrator, Alexandra Petrokina, developed these incredible images. I mentioned what I wanted. She created it and brought it into fruition, and I just love them so much. So we have a few of those available as well. You can contact us at thevisceralvoice@gmail.com or check out The Visceral Voice at eBay. Now back to the show. I love that. You just said when practicing it in your body, you're practicing it in the world. Oh, I wrote it down. I was like, it is a quote now, an Alexandra quote. I'm like, oh, I felt that so deeply that I had to write it down. So how do you use somatic movement to meet, well, you kind of just mentioned it with last summer.
Well, that,
but
that's
meet like a given moment.
Yeah. And that's one way. I mean, it depends on what I'm doing. Honestly, it's become so integrated in my life that I use it in everything. One of the things that I really like, there are also, which are shared by both Laban and Bartenieff systems, 4 themes. And the themes sound like binaries, but really they're like a Mobius band, where they're inherent in each other, they're because of each other. Inner, outer, stability, mobility, exertion, recuperation, and function expression. And they're always because of each other, and they're always present at the same time. There is no inner without an outer, and vice versa. Exertion, recuperation, I think we often think of as work and rest, but really, I think of it more as work and work to find balance, because really mindfully resting is an exertion. It's a certain kind of, I am choosing. And for some of us, it's a hard exertion. I'm putting down my phone. I'm turning off the screens. I'm not ruminating. I'm not planning. I'm not rehashing. I'm just being. And it's a lot of work. Meditating is work. Resting can be work for us. But mostly what we're talking about is finding balance. So, say you work in a corporate job and you sit at a computer all day, and that's your particular kind of exertion of your work. You might train for a marathon in your off time, and that's a recuperation. Is it an exertion? Oh, hell yeah. But it's also a recuperation. And then what do you do to recuperate from the marathon? Maybe it's snuggling your kid. Is that an exertion? Yeah, parenting is always an exertion, even the sweet parts, you're working towards something. So everything is effort. Everything is making choices that are mindful. But we try to find that balance. So I use it in my life. I certainly use it in mentorship. One of my biggest things I do is try to break down into parts. When I'm doing mentorship with a client and they say, well, I want this thing. I want to be in a big dance company. Great, wonderful. We're going to break that down into so many Post-it notes. And, I think often we name something that we want, and then we just keep that name in our head, and we just keep going for that. And we forget to check in with all of the parts that are inside it. Often we don't notice that some of those things have changed. Some of them have been accomplished. Some of them we actually don't want anymore. We just keep, I did this with a job in higher education. All I want is a tenure track job, and I kept saying it. And then one day I realized that everything that I wanted in a tenure track job, except for free college for my kids, I had gotten. I was teaching advanced students really interesting things. I had a lot of freedom. I had some financial stability. I had gotten everything I wanted out of a tenure track job.
Mm.
And I actually realized I didn't want it.
Mhm.
But I just had kept saying, I had been saying it for so long that I didn't realize I didn't want it. So I use it to break down what we're looking at with a mentorship client. And then, of course, I use it in theater. I use effort. I'm directing and choreographing an off-Broadway play that's going up next summer. It's an adaptation of Macbeth. And Lady Macbeth has a scene that we all know where she's really losing, she's decompensating out, the out speech, right? And she's going from high intensity expression to high intensity expression, but really different states. So we did all effort. You're all of this, then you're all of that. And we did this really dynamic exchange of efforts, changing on a dime. And we just practiced through effort. We also, talk about, I used scales in that piece because where you move in space communicates directly to the audience. If you're coming straight at them, it communicates one thing. If you're on an oblique angle, it's going to communicate something else. So we really talked, because the audience is a very essential part of this play. They're the third witch in this play. There are
Mm.
two actors. They're the two witches. There are three witches. The audience is the third witch. So it's very conspiratorial in a way. And the audience gets a fair amount of direct address. How are we making it known to the audience when they are kind of implicated and when they're not? It was through space, through my choices in space, and being very mindful about those choices. And then, of course, I teach this directly, so I use it in my teaching. I find that people come to it for really different reasons. Sometimes it's more of a personal growth reason. Sometimes it's a recovery from their own trauma, be it body trauma or other. Sometimes it's wanting to communicate more clearly, be it with actors or students or just in their life. I've had revelations about how to respond to people that I found challenging. You're in a collegial relationship with somebody, and it's like, oh, that person rubs me the wrong way, and I always feel so I can't communicate. We have this terrible, habit that keeps happening where we have conflict. I'll say, okay, let me back off and analyze what's happening here. What's my effort life like? What's their effort life like? Oh, tend to be quick and direct, and they tend to be in free flow and sustained time. So we're in like really opposite.
Mm.
So what if I tried to be a little bit more sustained and speak more slowly and leave more space between thoughts? And maybe they would feel less confrontational and less kind of challenged by me.
Mm.
And maybe it would allow them to come into the conversation and feel invited. And so, at the heart of it, it's all empathy practices. And I really like using it to figure out what's the need of the moment, whether it's a body need, a communication need, a spiritual, emotional need, intellectual. I'm not breaking that down. Um, I had a choreographer I was mentoring, and she was making a piece about feminism, um, but her work was very frontal facing, and it was all women in the piece. And I said, just in terms like historically, this is how we objectify women. We put them in a frame. They allow us to look at them, and they're moving for us.
Mm.
I said, what would happen if the space was really three-dimensional, 360, and their front, what I was saying before, their
Mhm.
front was prioritized, that the audience, we didn't gravitate towards showing ourselves to the audience. Does that feel more independent, autonomous? Does it empower the female performers? And, so she played around with that. And it was quite an interesting exploration.
Yeah, when you had brought that up, as far as front facing, is that where someone might be in front of you or an audience might be in front of you, or is that where your front is? And you said that, I'm like, oh, yeah. I mean, how often do we break it down to that point? And I also had a thought way back when you were talking about how we are conditioned by our teachers in that movement, how that choreographer is moving and how they're moving. And really from such a young age, we're conditioned by the movement of our parental figures and of our sibling figures. We're watching the movements and the behaviors of those who are closest to us. And that's really how we're learning how to move, not necessarily feeling the movement itself. So that really, I was really having those thoughts as well, as you had mentioned, what can happen in a classroom setting, and then also what we're learning from immediately from at our space, from whatever space we're in, whether that's
Right.
home or class or.
And, I think, I'm a professor and I teach pedagogy, and we're all in a big, again, mobility cycle, a revolution of trying to listen more and understand more and be more inclusive and inviting. But what does that mean? How do you do that? Part of it is realizing that everybody has a complex system of how they respond to human movement, which includes proximity. So, how close do I get to you? And I could think, oh, well, if I'm 18 inches away from you, you should feel safe, because that's kind of the standard of distance where we feel like we're, not being encroached upon. But that's not true for everybody. So, if I can read your body language and say, you, though, would like me to stay farther away.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can't read that, I can't understand that about that person. So I'm watching them go into more bound flow. Their body gets tighter. Their shoulders get a little closer to their skull. Their skin looks like it tightens, and I'm like, I'm too close to you. So, and is that it's cultural, it's familial, it's geographic, it's all kinds of things. We know that we accumulate information about what is safe. And so, as we're in these conversations about consent, they're so much more nuanced than we're making them. And we talk about, like, oh, well, make sure that you say no if you have a no. That is making so many assumptions about the person's ability to feel their own no.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we have to be better about slowing down and being able to read our students to say, they may not have their no available, but I'm seeing that I need to slow down and maybe back off and maybe give them more time and maybe ask them a question that's not just a yes or no question.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because I think female identifying and people who've grown up in any kind of oppressed group have a really different relationship to no, and have often grown up being educated that no is not an option. That's not available to them. And children in general get taught that, but female identifying children get taught that more often. No is not an option. And so to suddenly say to a college student or a 20-something woman, oh, make sure you tell me no if it's no. They don't know until they go home that night. I didn't like that. Right? So you have to create an environment in which they're able to start feeling that. Part of that is helping to read their body language, and then maybe either reflecting that back or taking cues from that, so that every cue doesn't have to be this straight verbal, boundary.
I love all of this and how you take it and really incorporate it into every aspect, socially, emotionally, politically, everything. What you had said about being in a mobility state and that recognition that, oh, hang on, in order to be in this mobility without potentially causing my own chaos, I needed to find stability, and bringing those movement words that we hear in our movement training or our fitness training, et cetera, but actually realizing that they as well as all of the vocabulary within these methods, how they can really be incorporated into all aspects of our lives. I just think that's really, really cool.
Yeah, and I don't think you need to know this work to be able to do that. So for anybody without any Laban or Bartenieff experience, you can start reframing what it is you want. What is it that you want in your life? I want more self-care. Okay, let's break down what self-care means. Maybe it means I want to center myself more. Okay, those are great words. The more physical words you can use, physical and spatial words you can use, the easier it is to figure out how you might practice this physically. I want to center myself more in my own life. I do everything for everybody. I'm a mother and a teacher and a coach and a whatever, and I don't tend to center myself. So I want to, okay, so center. Okay, so center is a part of the body, right? Is it my spine? Is it my muscular center? Is it my navel? Is it organ? And I can start to ask myself these questions. Okay, I'm going to start to do some authentic movement, just moving without any destination. I'm really going to think about my spine. And I'm going to think about my spine being the initiation, and I'm just going to watch the sequencing, and I'm always going to go back to my spine. Or do I think of center as an organ? Do I think of it as breath? And however you want to do it, there's no one way, right?
Mm.
However you choose to interpret it, and probably whatever comes to mind first is what you need. It just takes a little faith to believe in it and just say, okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to practice, or I'm going to close my eyes and just stand and feel this dynamic alignment of always trying to find center. Or I'm going to walk and feel my tailbone being the motivator for my walk. And I'm going to practice feeling my center line as I move through the world. Whatever it is that you make up that's physical is going to change how you operate in the world, because you are operating in the world when you do that.
Mm-hmm.
And your body is learning, your heart, mind, spirit, you're learning. It's all one thing. I don't believe there's any separation between any of these things.
Alexandra, this has been so incredibly informative. I have learned so much from you in 45 minutes, more than what I learned in, weeks of studying 8 qualities of Laban. But if people want to get in touch with you, if they want to learn more about you and more about your work, what would be the best way to do that?
You can reach me through my website, which is alexandrabellerdances.org. And I have a course coming up in September on all of this stuff. It's an introduction to both Laban and Bartenieff. It's a 9-week course that I'm doing virtually. So it's a remote course. And that's on my website. And then, of course, the Laban Institute for Movement Studies is there if anyone feels like they want a bigger, they want to get the degree. But I offer an introduction to both Laban and Bartenieff. And I have one of those coming up.
Yay, amazing. So we all need to check out this class coming up in September. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for being here and teaching me this afternoon. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, tell your colleagues, students, and friends. Subscribe, rate, and please write a review. You can find us on Instagram or Facebook, and feel free to check out my website at www.thevisceralvoice.com for information on programs and upcoming events. I hope you join us next time for another wonderful conversation on the Visceral Voice.